Yeah.
We have Vince in. Good.
Okay.
we could see you were here, but we couldn't see your picture. You couldn't see your face. So I've just clicked you in, I hope. Okay. Thank you very much indeed, Vince. And we are extremely sorry for the technical mishap. So
yes, well, you can blame that on me. I hadn't thought through the technicalities of joining. So I'm getting quite a lot of feedback. Is there any way we can cut that out?
You sound all right to me, so it's probably your end.
Right, okay.
Perhaps I should just explain, Vince, that what I've said to people while they've been sitting very patiently is really just to explain the 4 big challenges that I suggested we were facing, and to ask the question of whether as a party we should be looking at a coherent overall plan for economic renewal. And that's the question we've asked you to start.
And I
thought the best way of addressing it is actually through your statement, which I thought was very good, very well written, says many of the right things, but I thought I can be useful by being critical, and I suppose indirectly answer the big question you've just asked. I think, first of all, we've got to be forward-looking. I mean, I noticed that the 4 names you cite as Social Democrats who are advancing it were Keynes, Lloyd George, FDR, and Beveridge. The last one died 70 years ago, and they're all Anglo-Saxons. And I think if we're actually looking at, modern ways to run a social democracy, we should be looking above all at the Swedish experience or Scandinavian generally. Today, Canada. Interesting experiments, probably countries you're not totally comfortable with, like Singapore, which have done extraordinary work in linking pension saving to public housing, for example. And I think another question we have to answer is we had a 20-year period in which we had Blair in Britain, Clinton in the United States, Schroeder in Germany, trying to look at social democracy by drawing on a combination of social purpose and markets. And that's gone very silent. I mean, it's quite an unfashionable way of looking at things at the moment. But has it died? I mean, was that whole period in vain? Are there any lessons to be learned from it? So that's my first question, sort of updating the framework with which I look at things. I think the second is timescale. I mean, it's not clear if the statement is addressed to decisions we should be taking next week or in the next general election manifesto or sometime indefinitely in the future. And that rather matters. And that leads to the heart of the economic discussion, which you wanted to focus on. And the phrase which you have is the last thing we need is austerity, by which you mean not cutting public expenditure. And I don't think any sensible person would argue for that under current conditions. Of course not. But the conditions which prevail at the moment are not going to operate indefinitely. In a next general election, we could be in a very different kind of economy. Keynes was very much in favor of austerity in the economic upswing. We could get back, and the bond market suggests this could well happen, to a period of inflation. And up to a point, that's fine. And it helps to wipe out some of the accumulated debt. But, what happens if it then gets out of control? You can use monetary policy. But if we think of some of the heroes of social democracy like Roy Jenkins, he made his reputation as an austerity chancellor. So it's the statement that the last thing we need is austerity is a good statement of policy tomorrow. It's not a good statement of policy in 3, 5, 10 years' time. And I think we need to distinguish that. And I think the second concept, where the time frame matters, is this enthusiasm for universal basic income. And those of you who will have heard me speaking on this before know that I'm a bit skeptical. I mean, I think it's it's a slogan. It doesn't, reveal what's in it in terms of content. What level do you fix it? How do you deal with tricky issues like housing benefit, carers benefit, which are exceptional? So at the moment, in the short run, universal helicopter payments, good idea. And, the Biden plan is brilliant and absolutely appropriate in the context in which we operate. But in a few years' time, it probably isn't the right approach. We already have a universal basic income system in a way for pensioners. People of my generation are paid a universal basic income whether or not we need it. And arguably, resources would be better allocated in a more selective way. So I think those are two of the big questions I have. And I think the third one relates to the first one I raised, which is that I think we've been a bit parochial. We've got three interesting experiments in social democracy at the moment. The big one, of course, in the United States. And, the Biden program looks a very attractive one to me. You've got Canada and New Zealand on a small scale. New Zealand actually is throwing up some interesting questions of economic management. The New Zealanders are introducing a system of targeting house prices through monetary policy. It seems, first sight, a very good idea. But the parochialism, I think, isn't just about the leading developed countries. Something that isn't really aired in the paper, which is absolutely crucial, is the fact that we've got a big shift in the world economy to East Asia, or Asia generally. If you take this truism that politicians love to trot out about Britain being the 5th or 6th largest country in the world, if you actually look at the IMF World Bank figures, I think it's the 8th. And we're in the process of being overtaken by Indonesia, which will surprise some people. We were overtaken a long time ago by China and India. But that really does matter. The world economy in the next few years is going to be driven by decisions taken mainly in China, but in the Asian region more generally. And I think some of the ideas that we need to be looking at in terms of economic management are to be best pursued by looking at Asia. I mean, Japan, more than any other country, has had to cope with this issue. But how do you run an economy with very large levels of public debt? And the experience of the last 10, 15 years, the Japanese have done it very well, actually. Kept their economy from collapsing into depression. And we should be looking at how they did it. And the Japanese have also, probably more than anybody else, looked at the whole issue about how you deal with aging in an innovative and creative way. So those are my general comments. Let me just make a few specifics. First of all, the paper raises the issue of tax policy. And it says some things which I'm sure we'd all agree with, that there is an argument for a short-term windfall tax, but in a way the corporation tax rate does that. I'm not sure that introducing a wealth tax is a better way of taxing wealth than improving capital gains tax and inheritance tax, but in any event, they don't raise much money. And I think if we're serious about, having a social democratic transformation, improved services and improved welfare state, you have to confront the issue of general levels of taxation. And the paper says, we shouldn't be increasing basic income tax and value-added tax. Well, why not? I mean, it's not, obviously you don't go into an election saying this is what you wish to do, but if you're thinking in broad terms, which I think we are trying to do, Sweden has a much higher level of value-added tax. I think it's 25%, it may have changed. Income tax too. It's the basic point. If you want good services and generous welfare system, you've got to pay for it. And everybody except the poorest people has got to pay for it. And that's a challenge I think Social Democrats need to confront. I think the second issue which we really need to focus on a lot is how we get out of this low productivity trap. It was a sort of feature we began to recognize in the wake of the financial crisis. Initially, we sort of patted ourselves on the back that we were solving the problem of unemployment, but actually we were storing up the problem of low productivity. And there are all kinds of problems there. Probably the central one is the issue of training. And that's now being compounded by all the difficulties coming out of the COVID pandemic. So, you know, we do need to look at some of the models. I mean, how do you get effective continuous education? Lord Sainsbury, who's a good social democrat, has come up with some ideas on how you promote training. But this has been something Britain has been terribly bad at, and constantly changing the framework within which we operate. I mean, I speak as somebody who had oversight of this for 5 years. It has been a complete mess over half a century. And if we're serious about you know, the upgrading of skills and lifetime education, we really do need to have some deep thinking and continuity and cross-party consensus about it. I think a third point, which is a related one, is about infrastructure. I think one of the points that has come out of COVID is how much digital infrastructure matters. And I think being very clear about how we pay for it. Ofcom came up with some points during the week, which is that we all should pay a lot more. You remember Jeremy Corbyn wanted to make it free for everybody, which was more popular, but probably not realistic. So what do we do? If we're going to get a digital rollout fast, there needs to be a sort of clear view on the financing mechanism, which is equitable, but also effective. I think a fourth issue, which is partly economic policy, but ranges more widely, is the recognition that the modern state is data. It's fundamentally changed. And there are different views about, you know, who owns and controls data. We're no longer talking about the commanding heights of the economy in the way that it was talked about half a century ago. It's about data control. And the American model is, you know, the private companies control data. The Chinese model is equally clear, the state controls it. We're not clear in Europe who should. I think there's an assumption that the individual owns it, but nobody has found a way of converting this into a stream of income. There's a really very big and profound issue, and I haven't seen in the paper any reference to it. So maybe I can leave it at that. I haven't directly addressed your paper, I've addressed it indirectly, but I thought it was quite useful to start with your statement, which was a very good statement, and see how we can build on it.
Okay, thank you very much, Vince. Gordon, do you want to add anything at this stage? Then, because we do appreciate the paper hasn't actually been published yet, so I don't know if Gordon wants to add anything else to that. And then, as I put in the chat, we will have some time for questions, but please do put your questions in the Q&A, because that's easier to monitor than chat questions in the chat, which sort of tend to go flying by. So please do put questions in the Q&A, and I will bring people in a little bit for any questions or indeed any comments they want to make. So Gordon, over to you.
Thanks, Louise, and thank you, Vince, for that. And indeed, I've made quite a few notes, which we will follow up in future drafts. I think there are a few questions I would ask. The first is, do you think that the nature of and extent of employment is fundamentally changing? There are quite a lot of people nowadays who go back to Keynes on spending more time with friends and family and enjoying ourselves at the ballet instead of being forced to work all the time. And people are talking, as they have done on a number of occasions in the past, about long-term lower levels of employment. Do you buy that?
No, I don't. I mean, you can always adjust the level of demand to get to something like full employment. Of course, full employment is a bit of an elusive concept. I think the more important questions about employment are two really, which is how we work and what we work at. The latter being the labour force question. I mean, I think there's some important issues around whether we work in hierarchical organizations, whether we have more or less flexibility, whether we have more or less contractual as more informal arrangements, gig economy and so on, and how you regulate it. So there are all those issues around how, and now, of course, remote versus, physical presence. I think the more difficult issue is around what. What are the areas of occupation which are expanding and which are declining, and how has the COVID affected the rates of change? I mean, we're all familiar with things that have been turbocharged by the pandemic, the shift in retail, telemedicine, remote working. I mean, these have all affected the pattern of employment. But what was very striking, there was an interesting paper by McKinsey recently, which looked at all the areas where the demand for labor was going to grow. And it was professionals of various kinds, management, creative industries, particularly in medicine, education. And there was virtually no area of unskilled or semi-skilled work where there was the likelihood of aggregate expansion. So that seems to me a more important question than the issues that were raised by Keynes 70 years ago, which is what do you do about the millions of people who are underskilled and who are being shaken out by this pandemic in the way that people were in the 80s in the industrial sector. What do the unskilled and the skilled do in future, and how do you help them?
That raises the interesting question that many of the new jobs you're talking about there would be in the main directly and partly indirectly financed by the state, which links to your earlier point about taxation. But how far should the state set out to manage the development of labour, whether by investment in education or by investment in the areas where those jobs will be created? I do know your answer to this question, but I think it might be worth sharing the broad idea of whether an industrial strategy is a good idea in the 21st century.
Yeah, I think it is. And I think one of the really terrible things this government did last week, had anybody noticed, but they had a framework for industrial strategy, which was part of a continuity, a cross-party continuity. It was started with Heseltine, continued with Mandelson. I took it forward. And after a brief hiatus with Sajid Javed, Greg Clark built on the structure of industrial strategy and supported by Theresa May's team. Even the dreaded Cummings was somebody who understood the importance of industrial strategy. But you've now got a Secretary of State who's had a rush of blood to the head and thinks we can go back to crude sort of Thatcherite economics, and you don't need a framework, and you don't need a strategy, you don't need the government, and just needlessly doing damage. I mean, there are several reasons why a structure, it doesn't need to be prescriptive, but first of all, we do need to have a framework within which there's some long-term thinking. I mean, there are quite a lot of core sectors, whether it's pharmaceuticals or the car industry or aerospace, particularly in the light of the greening requirements, where you need to have long-term planning. And they do need government help, and it needs to work within a long-term framework. Day-to-day decision-making and response to annual results and the stock market, I mean, that's a hopeless way to operate. So I think in terms of basic strategy, you do need a framework. And as you pointed out in the paper, I mean, I did a paper for Radix, the think tank, trying to update all the thinking about this and also drawing on international experience, and quite eclectic. I mean, the United States has a pretty good system of, they don't call it industrial strategy, but the DARPA system, which Mr. Cummings was so keen on, was part of it. In places like Korea and Singapore, it's much more methodical. Israel has quite an interventionist approach to the promotion of innovation, and other countries in different ways. You don't throw the whole thing out, I mean, it's just nonsensical. And to some extent, labor is derived demand. It's difficult to sort of plan the structure of the labor market. It comes from the activities which do expand. But there is quite a lot that can be done. There is now a decent structure of apprenticeship training, which has been set up in certain industries. And I also think, this isn't necessarily fashionable, but that universities should be doing a bit more sectoral planning, thinking about the skills that are needed rather than just responding to student preference.
Okay, thank you very much. We've got a couple of questions that I'm going to bring in now. Javid, I think Vince has pretty much asked yours, so I'm not going to come to you. That was about should regeneration intervention for regeneration increase or decrease. I think we've probably covered that. But Claire Tyler, would you like to come in and ask your question, please?
Just to say, if you request audio and video, then we can bring you in. But you need to click the button there. If not, we can ask questions on people's behalf.
Yeah. So where it says down the bottom, ask a question. Is that what? Yeah. And then I can bring you in. Okay. And oh, that didn't work.
Should be appearing in a second. I think it might take a second.
I did click. Claire should be appearing.
Might have to connect sort of video and stuff.
If it's not, then I'll read out the question. Yeah, we're not getting it coming in, are we?
I was going to say, for everyone else, Louise, maybe if you want to, for the next questions, maybe just mention the couple of people who you're going to call, and then they can sort of, get ready.
Okay. So let me read out Claire's question, because we seem to have lost her somewhere in the ether. Claire Tyler of Enfield says, you mentioned New Zealand. What are your views on the New Zealand wellbeing budget? Or what are your views on the New Zealand wellbeing budget as a way of marrying economic management with social purpose and tackling inequalities between different groups?
Well, it's a good idea. It addresses the problem that many people have raised. The GDP is a very inadequate indicator. I mean, GDP is necessary to track the economy in the short run. It's something you can measure, and you know whether it's expanding or contracting or more or less rapidly. But to get an overall sense of the way your country is going, you need a much broader range of metrics. There was an attempt to do this under the coalition. It wasn't very well advertised, but there are some quite interesting papers which measure welfare, which actually measure happiness. There are ways of doing it, psychometric studies of different kinds. But yes, I very much welcome the need to have a rounded view. and that encompasses both personal satisfaction and environmental depletion. You know, it needs to be factors in. The fact that certain kinds of work, like domestic caring, are not rewarded and are therefore not counted in conventional statistics. So yeah, the more we can have deeper, broader measurements of social trends and progress, the better.
Okay, thank you. Shelley Salter, do you want to click on the ask a question and come in with your question? And then I should be able to let you in. Have we got Shelley? Oh, here we are. Now, if I click here, see if it works this time. Oh, this is exciting. Yeah, excellent. We did it that time. Over to you, Shelley. Except you're on mute.
It is rather muted.
Can you unmute her, Andy?
I can't. I just tried to click, but I don't think she was on mute. There you go. We can't hear Shelley. Can you click the little settings cog and make sure that you've got the right audio? Little cog at the bottom. You should be able to click. And connect your microphone. Can't hear you, sorry. Louise, you might need to ask this one as well.
Sorry, Shelley, I'm going to read it out because I don't know what's happened. But the cog at the bottom apparently is the thing to be clicking, but we haven't got you. Okay, well, that's what Shelley looks like, everybody. And her question is, the service industry has been worse hit by current issues. What might replace this? Because some of this isn't going to bounce back.
No, I think it's not right to say that services industries will disappear. I mean, bits of the service sector, hospitality in particular, has been very badly hit. But most of that will come back. I mean, it's not like the contraction that took place in the 80s around manufacturing industry, because, you know, once you switch off a steel blast furnace, it's very difficult to bring it back again. Closing down a pub, you can reopen it. So I think we can exaggerate the structural shift that's taking place. In any event, there's a big difference between the issues which affect hospitality, which are temporary and related to COVID. The problems of the retail sector, which are partly related to COVID, but also related to a general trend to e-commerce, and other areas, financial services, where there are regulatory issues connected with Europe. So I think looking at services as a whole, which is what, 80% of the British economy, I mean, that's what our economy is going to be dominated by for the foreseeable future, but with a slightly different mix, probably.
Okay, Shelley, have you got your microphone working?
I think it might be. You need to flip it down. I think you've got it. You've not got your microphone flipped down, Shelley. It's up here. I'm not sure. Your microphone. It's
okay.
You need to flip your microphone.
It's on the headset, isn't it? Yeah, I can see.
It's there. Other side. No.
No.
Oh yeah.
Oh, that was a noise.
Can you hear me?
Oh yes.
Oh yeah, a voice too.
What I'm alluding to, Vince, is that a lot of these companies will go bust. You know, if they can't open up, you know, they've got rent and rates and overheads to pay, and if they haven't traded for over a year, that's a very serious problem.
Yeah, no, that's right. There are some companies that have been permanently crippled, sadly. And once the furlough scheme phased out in September, some of them are going to be exposed as insolvent, sadly. But you know, as long as the demand is there, there is no reason why other people will come forward and provide the same services.
Do you think, I mean,
I think the big question actually is what happens to the store of savings that's been built up?
right,
I mean, traditionally, Britain saves, what, 5-6% out of our disposable income. It's now 25%, partly because old codgers like me have, built up a balance in our bank account and haven't got anything to spend money on. But once we do spend, the demand will flood the market for certain things. And the service industry of its nature is open to easy, reasonably straightforward startups. And the fact that some companies will close and others will open, and it's sad for the good businesses that have been hit. But I don't think it necessarily represents a sort of fundamental scarring. I mean, that is the problem for the labour force rather than for the corporate sector.
Okay, thanks very much, Shelley. I'm going to move us on now. John Bryant had a question. Can we get John in? If you click on the orange square, you should then appear and I can bring you in. Again, if that doesn't work, I'll read it out. I don't think we're getting John in. Okay, I'll ask it, and then if he appears, he might have a supplementary. So this is the question from John. To maintain current state pensions and healthcare standards for the elderly, do you agree that we have to increase the number of workers paying taxes to pay for this through immigration?
Well, that's a subtle variation of the question I was raised earlier.
Hang on, we've got
about
John,
whether we needed increased rates of tax. But the issue about the economics of immigration is this, that it does rejuvenate the population. It has more people of working age who are paying tax. So it does alleviate the pressures in the short run. But of course, immigrant workers grow old, like the rest of us. So it's a temporary alleviation of the tax burden. I don't think there's any way of getting around the problem that the population has to pay a relatively higher share of their income in tax. But bringing in more people is a temporary expedient.
Okay. Do you want to come back on that, John? If you can unmute yourself. Can you help us here, Andy?
Should be at the bottom of the screen. Microphone.
On this cog. Yeah.
I mean, my understanding was that when we first started a state pension in this country, there were 12 workers paying taxes for every pensioner. We're down to 4 workers per pensioner, and that's going to go down even further. And it's going to be very difficult for any political party to argue to increase taxes for the current workers who can't now afford to get on the housing ladder and can't afford lots of things which the elderly can afford. And so it seems to me that immigration is a short-term fix to try and make sure we can moderate the tax increases for the workers. Ultimately, we need to find out what the Japanese are doing, because they've got an more elderly population than we have. How are they coping with this dilemma?
Well, I think you state the problem correctly. It does help in the short run to have a bigger labour force, and you can import it. But there are all these familiar issues around immigration. I mean, not the concrete stuff around house and so on, but issues of identity, which led us into the Brexit problem. I mean, I'm actually, broadly in favour of liberal immigration. Actually the big difficulty ahead is going to be making the case for less skilled immigration, given that we will have a large pool of indigenous unemployed unskilled people. So Yeah. I mean, I agree with your basic proposition.
I wonder, Louise. I wonder, Louise, if you mind if I just added a word.
Please do. Yeah. Then can I just say, then after Gordon, I'm going to bring in Simon Lepori if you want to be on standby, Simon.
I just wanted to say to John and Vince that one of the answers about studying the Japanese experience might be to look around for some of those of us who worked as consultants advising the Japanese government on how to do this, and pay us large quantities of money for sharing that experience. One of the other things, though, which came from Adair Turner and the work we did during the Labour government in leading up to the 2006 White Paper on pensions, was actually to recognise that retirement does not have to be a single set age. One of the few things that the coalition did immediately for the good was to abolish the concept of mandatory retirement ages, and how you balance issues about tax and age of actual retirement and savings, and you manage that process, is a principle itself. The Japanese experience particularly also picks up on the idea that the concept of the working life, which starts when you finish education, continues to a certain point and then stops, is less and less a description of reality and less helpful when you're thinking about how to finance and manage that period of life.
Yeah, I think those are very helpful interventions, Gordon, and you really know this stuff. Yes, I'm glad you've gone back to the Japanese experience. I hadn't realized you were an advisor to Mr. Abe. That's a real feather in your cap. But you know, just to take an example, I'm still working as hard as I did in my early life, and I'm now 77. And a lot of other people are in this position. One of the ways of paying for all this is to make sure that people like me, actually people pay national insurance. And there's an inexplicable anomaly in the tax system that pensioners who work, have good income, you know, don't pay any national insurance. It's one of the many bits of feather bedding that we built into the pensioner existence. I mean, I think it was wonderful that Steve Webb were able to get through his reforms which have effectively eliminated pensioner poverty. But part of the price of it is that the people who are paying for it are the younger working age population. Many of them have been, you know, serious poverty as a result. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Right, I'm now bringing in Simon, who, have I got Simon now?
Yep.
Yeah. Who, by the looks of it, Simon, are you our Greater Manchester Metro mayoral candidate?
Yes, I am.
I thought you might be, right, by the tone of your question.
Good luck.
Thank you, Vince. And it's great to be here, actually, with Gordon and Vince and yourself, Louise. I don't know Andy that well, but I am well aware of the three of you. And Gordon is a Northwest legend, so...
you don't need to know me, don't worry.
No, so part of the Greater Manchester mayoral role has control over a skills and jobs budget. So, and if elected, I would want to prepare the city region for the future economies. And I was asked this in the hustings recently, and I struggled to actually explain it. And so I probably need to go back and do some research myself. But I want to know how we use that skills budget to train people in apprenticeships for industries and tasks that haven't even been invented yet.
Well, you can't clearly teach people skills when the skills haven't been identified. What you can do is teaching people to learn, you know, how to learn. And if I were in your position, I haven't seen your budget, but I would want to plough as much as I could into adult education. it's taken a terrible battering in recent years. I mean, I tried to shield it, but only partially. And, you know, some, you know, brilliant work in adult education colleges. You know, trade unions have played a big role. It's been savaged. It's exactly the time when we need it more. So I would start with that. I mean, as far as apprenticeships are specifically, there is a mechanism through the levy. I mean, I didn't like the way they did the levy, but it exists, and presumably part of your mandate is to make that work. What I would concentrate on myself are the you know, higher level apprenticeships, grades, you know, 4, 5. You know, so that you're signaling to a younger generation that there is a career path which doesn't necessarily involve going through campus universities. You can get a degree level qualification through an apprenticeship. I think once people recognize that, they will see the value of vocational education, and it will be particularly relevant in the new skills areas that you're thinking.
Yeah, thank you.
Now, Gordon, having been described as a legend, I think I do need to bring you in on this one, as it's on your doorstep as well, the Northwest. And if Simon does get elected as the regional mayor, then he might be asked you to be an economics advisor. So, do you want to add anything to that?
First thought, as ever on this subject, is to draw attention to those areas which are not fortunate enough to be within metropolitan areas, but simply just over the border from them. And one of the big questions, one of the things we've been addressing here with our local university, which is the University of Central Lancashire, is how we develop stronger links with some of the major research universities, including in Manchester, in ways which will bring employment over the border. So we want to build on our history here in Burnley as the country's actual centre of precision engineering in ways that can build on the research that's happening there. And the thing that worries me is that Simon, or whoever is elected, is going to find themselves fighting the case to keep that investment within their area to the detriment of Lancashire and Cumbria and Cheshire, and his opposite number in Merseyside will be doing the same. The challenge of how we take, for instance, a coherent regional approach to these things is one that needs to be addressed. But the electoral logic, as I'm sure Simon will agree, does not mean that he and his colleagues are going to be spending much time on thinking about those areas which are just beyond their borders and do not have the budgets which metropolitan districts and the metropolitan counties have. So my comment is not particularly supportive, but it has, I think, to be one of those of which proper account is taken in terms of economic policy.
Thank you. That's great.
I'm now going to thank you, Simon. That was great.
Good luck.
I'm now going to, as time is getting on, bring in. I'm just going to line up 3 people, and we'll bring them in as they pop up. So, if Rita Baker, James Mason, and Andrew Howdine can all click on your Ask a Question bar, I will then bring you in, and you can ask your questions. I will bring in first whoever manages to get in first. Let's have a look. So it was Rita Baker. Oh, here we are. Here's Andrew. Right. Okay, Andrew, you're the first off then. Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Great.
I think this is like Star Trek. That's because I'm an old person.
It is rather.
Don't really understand this.
Jeff Bezos' wealth reputedly increases at about $150,000 per minute, while most of the people who work for him in this country are actually on a minimum wage and not enjoying excellent working conditions. As the 4th industrial revolution accelerates, is it inevitable that we're going to get those disparities, or could you think of any mechanism that would allow us to share the wealth that is generated much more equally?
Well, I think it is inevitable that you're going to get these extraordinary concentrations of wealth around new technology platforms, because they basically save the world. You know, 9 billion people are potentially their customers. So there's a lot of economic rent accrues from that. I mean, the question then is how you A, regulate it, and B, tax it. I mean, there have been some progress on the latter. You know, these sort of OECD tax reform proposals have been crawling along for years, but there now seems to be an agreement at the European level, and potentially with the new American administration, that you have a coordinated approach to taxing the corporate incomes of the tech platforms, and they can't do sort of tax arbitrage from one country to another. It's very frustrating that it's taking so long, and it's quite little at the moment, but it is happening. The second question is regulation, and you know how you bring in competition so that the Mr. Bezos and his friends can't just earn large amounts of monopoly profit, which they do at the moment. The European Commission has actually done a good job on this. Ms. Versteer, you know, Liberal commissioner, did a lot, but it was all rather slow motion. There are people in the Democratic majority now in Congress who want to do something similar in the States. And we now have our own competition and markets authority in the UK post-Brexit. We may not like Brexit, but at least there is now a national authority that can stop, you know, the Amazons of this world abusing our own competition rules by stifling, you know, competitors, you know, operating cartel arrangements at the expense of booksellers and so on. So I think the answer to your question is a bit fatalistic. It's difficult to see this problem being dealt with in the short run, but a combination of significantly tougher regulation and coordinated tax policies take us at least in the right direction, you know, coupled with proper labor protection for the labor force. And you know, you know, there are all kind of ideas through, you know, minimum wage, greater job security for you know, people on gig contracts, which can help with that. There is, I think, the beginning of a revival of a kind of trade union movement in industries which until recently didn't have it. And I don't know what the rules are in Amazon, but we should be making it a mandatory requirement for companies to allow labor organizations if workers want them.
Thank you.
Louise.
Right, I'm not usually on mute, as people know. Right, Rita, we've got coming in. Fabulous.
Oh, hello.
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 It was quite a pleasant surprise, actually, if you call. I was quite shocked. I've been hearing a lot, or coming across a lot recently about this donut model. I've found it on all sorts of forums and Zoom events that I've been on. And I've always felt, I've run a small business myself, a language training school for adults, teaching English as a foreign language. And I've been working with people from blue chip companies, international companies, and they've always said, what are your plans for expansion? And when I said, don't want to expand, I want to keep it small and personal and just work with people like you and pay my staff and have a nice life, which I think is what the donut model is sort of, you know, that's the principle of it. And I just wondered what you think of it, because it just, this idea that the market, you have to increase your market share all the time, just seems to have no logic to me.
Well, there may be people on the call who understand this donut economics better than I do. I've heard the phrase, but I'm not quite sure what it means. But if we're looking at a sort of national level problem, I mean, the underlying difficulty we have is that we have relatively few companies in Britain that are willing to really expand, and, you know, in the way that, you know, they say the German Mittelstand have done. It was something identified by the CBI and others. There's about 20 to 30,000 companies that could provide the basis for, you know, long-term employment, but they need help scaling up. There is a big gap in the financial markets for middle-sized companies who are trying to raise equity capital and also get loans from the bank. So I suppose the answer is that if you're content being who you are and what you are, well, good for you. But if, from a national economic point of view, it's the guys who want to scale up and provide a lot more employment who, yes, we've got to try to support.
I mean, I don't have a problem about scaling up to increase more employment, but it's just the profit motive that, why would I need more than I need for me personally as an employer? You know. Well,
you know, there are lots of companies which are, you know, governed by social objectives. I mean, I happen to sit on the board of a social enterprise. It's got an 80 million turnover. It's quite a big operation, but there's no shareholders. It's registered as a charity, and it exists to pursue a broad social purpose, which is to help people to be mobile who currently aren't mobile, by getting buses to them at reasonable cost. Yeah. So, you know, there are all kinds of variations of social enterprise. You know, co-op, worker-owned, charity-based companies. And we need to be doing what we can through the tax system or whatever to make sure there are no obstacles and have more diversity. But such companies do exist, and I can tell you because I'm involved with one of them.
Okay, thank you very much, Vince. For those who haven't heard of it, Donut Economics is a book written by Kate Rayworth, and I believe as we are having our fringe meeting, Green Liberal Democrats are having one at the same time on this subject, and Gordon has said maybe this is something that we should have a session on in the future. So as I seem to have lost James, but his question was about UBI versus negative income tax, which I'm now not going to take because we're basically almost out of time. But just to say that our next talk, as was mentioned by Gordon at the beginning, what kind of UBI, is on 29th of March with Paul Noblet, who is leading on this, leading the working group on this. So you might want to, if you're interested in UBI, you might want to come along to that. But Gordon, do you want to add anything on donut economics? You're on mute.
Because I was saying no.
Right, okay, fair enough. Well, donut economics is obviously another topic for another day then. That's absolutely fine. So
I think what you're saying about Green Liberal Democrats and the sustainability link is one that, amongst others, the chair of the SLF's events group has a special interest in. And I think bringing together the economic and environmental arguments would be well worth doing. And my old friend Keith Melton, who was at UMIST when I was at Manchester University in the mid-1960s, now leads Green Liberal Democrats, and I would be happy to collaborate again.
Excellent.
Just to add a word on your negative income tax, I know you I know you don't want to open up a discussion on it, but we have a real live experiment in the form of Gordon Brown's tax credit system. That was negative income tax. I mean, conceptually, it was absolutely great and rather better than UBI. But there are all kind of practical problems around, the withdrawal rates, around people's fluctuating income. So, look back on the various reports that were done on Gordon Brown's system, and it will answer, I think, a lot of the questions about negative income tax.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. That's just gets it in under the wire. So I'm just going to repeat what Gordon said at the beginning as people were coming in about the next SLF events we've got coming up, which is Beverage 2 with Professor Pat Thane on the 23rd of March at 7 o'clock. Looking at how in the 21st century we can take forward beverage. And I think it was very interesting when Vince made the point earlier that a lot of these, or all of these people we're talking about are actually dead, and it might be good to have a look to the future as well as to the past, which I think is a very very good point. And that event is going to be chaired by Gordon. And then on Monday the 29th of March at 7 o'clock we have got What Kind of UBI, which is, I think people will find very interesting. Paul Noblet, as I was saying, who's one of the leading experts on this and chair of the working group, is going to be speaking, as is Jane Dodds, who, as well as being leader in Wales, is chair of the Lib Dems for Basic Income campaign group. And equally, Christine Jardine is who's leading the cross-party working group on UBI, is going to be speaking. So if you're interested in UBI, and that includes you, Vince, if you want to join in the debate with us, please do. We would love to see you all at those events. I would not be forgiven by Gordon if I didn't rattle the buckets. Usually at SLF events, me and Ian Brodie Brown and various other people are standing at the door rattling buckets at you. Although even online or via Zoom, we do have costs for this. So if you would like to contribute to SLF funds, please do. I think the link was put in the chat. Otherwise, you can go onto our website, which was also in the chat. So beyond that, I would like to thank Vince very much indeed. We were very sorry again that there was a bit of techie issues at the beginning, but it's
no, I should be apologising.
But where I was, as a very old and dear friend of the SLF, where I was very, very glad to have you. So thank you again for your time, and thank you to Gordon for his contributions as well. And special thanks to Andy Galloway for being SLF's own techie advisor. I was in a fringe meeting earlier where everything was going horribly wrong, and I thought, oh well, they need somebody like Andy in their organisation, the same as what we have. So thank you very much indeed, everybody. We've had a lot of people in this fringe meeting, which is great. I think we had 90, I think, at the top amount, so that's really good. Do look on our website for more information about what we are doing, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you very much, everybody.